The night tasted of champagne and expensive perfume, but Valeria Morales breathed only rage. Under the false name of Vera, she walked through the marble halls of the Salazar mansion, carrying a tray of canapés, her black waitress uniform clinging to the thin body sculpted by hunger and years of waiting. The cheap fabric itched against her skin, constantly reminding her that she didn't belong in that world of ostentatious luxury and blood-stained wealth. The necklace she wore, discreet, with the initials VM engraved in antique silver, weighed against her chest like an unfulfilled promise, a physical reminder of what she had lost and what she had come to recover. No one noticed the small detonator hidden on the back of the pendant, disguised as a decorative clasp. No one noticed her, period. She was just another one of the dozens of temporary employees hired to serve the Mexican elite on that night of obscene celebration. That was exactly how she wanted it. Gail Salazar's wedding was an ego celebration disguised as a sacred ceremony. White flowers imported from Holland covered every available surface, enormous arrangements of lilies, orchids, and roses that exuded a perfume so intense it was nauseating. Swarovski crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like tears frozen in time, each worth more than Valeria had earned in her entire life. The guests, politicians with practiced smiles, businessmen with watches costing fortunes, figures from Mexican high society dressed in European designer clothes, laughed too loudly, drank Dom Perignon champagne too quickly, celebrating a man Valeria knew to be a monster disguised as a respectable businessman. She circulated among them like a ghost, invisible until the moment she chose to appear, listening to fragments of conversations that revealed the rot behind the polished facades. A senator discussed bribes. A judge mentioned archived cases. A socialite laughed about how she had bought her way out of a money laundering charge. This was Gail Salazar's world, a world built on corruption, fear, and systemic violence. During the toast, as Gail raised his crystal glass and the crowd of 300 guests applauded his empty words about love, the future, and building a better Mexico, Valeria approached the bride with calculated steps. The woman was too young for Gail, 23 against his 42, and beautiful in a rehearsed way, her face perfectly made up, her hair in elaborate curls that had taken hours to create, and a French lace dress that probably cost more than a car. She was Sofia Marquez, daughter of federal judge Rodrigo Marquez, whose name opened doors that not even all the dirty money of the Salazars could force open. This marriage was not about love. It was a business transaction, a strategic alliance between organized crime and the judicial system, a merger of empires that would make the Salazars virtually untouchable. Valeria tilted the tray with millimetric precision, the result of hours practicing the exact movement in her tiny apartment, and let a single drop of Chateau Margaux red wine fall onto the French lace dress. The stain spread like fresh blood on white fabric. The bride gasped, a sharp sound of genuine horror. The entire room fell silent for a full heartbeat, 300 pairs of eyes turning to that small but devastating scene. The string quartet stopped playing. The photographer lowered his camera. Even the waiters froze in their position. It was then that Gail Salazar truly saw her for the first time in 12 years. His eyes, dark as bottomless wells, calculating, accustomed to assessing people as if they were property or threats, never complete human beings, fixated on her with an intensity that made Valeria's skin tingle, as if thousands of ants were crawling beneath her epidermis. He tilted his head slightly to the right, like a predator recognizing another in unfamiliar territory, trying to decide whether he was facing prey or competition. Valeria felt a shiver run down her spine, vertebra by vertebra, but kept her face carefully neutral, her brown eyes lowered in feigned submission, her body tense in a posture of deference she didn't feel at all. "You," Gail said, his deep, controlled voice cutting through the nervous murmur of the crowd that was beginning to comment on the incident. "Come here, now." Valeria obeyed, each step measured with the same precision a tightrope walker uses when crossing an abyss. Every muscle prepared to flee or fight, depending on how the situation unfolded. Gail studied her face for a long moment that seemed to stretch into an eternity, his thick eyebrows furrowed in deep concentration. She could see the gears turning behind those dark eyes, the calculating mind trying to place her face in some memory file. "I know you," he murmured, more to himself than to her, his voice laden with something that could be curiosity or suspicion. "Where do I know you from? Your face. There's something familiar." "I don't know, sir," Valeria replied, her voice soft and slightly husky, carefully different from the higher-pitched timbre of the 15-year-old girl he had destroyed a dozen years ago. "Perhaps you saw me at another event. I work at many high-society weddings and parties." Gale continued studying her, his eyes scanning every inch of her face as if memorizing every detail. Then, slowly, that smile appeared, the smile that newspapers and business magazines called charismatic, that television programs described as the smile of a business visionary, but which Valeria recognized as barely disguised cruelty, a pleasure in having power over other human beings. "No, it's something deeper. You have audacity, courage. You didn't flinch. You didn't apologize immediately. You didn't panic." He turned to the bride, who was being comforted by two bridesmaids trying to clean the stain with linen napkins, both whispering frantically about how to fix the disaster. "Forgive my future wife. Sophia can be a little dramatic when things don't go according to her perfect plan." He returned his full attention to Valeria, and this time there was something different in the glint of those eyes. It could be genuine interest, or it could be growing suspicion. It was impossible to tell. "You, however, you maintained your composure. That's rare. People with that kind of control under pressure are valuable. They could be useful to someone in my position. Stay after the event. I want to have a private conversation with you about a possible job opportunity." Across the room, partially hidden behind an Italian marble column, Mateo Salazar, Gale's younger brother by 3 years, with broad shoulders from spending hours at the gym trying to compensate for other inadequacies, a jaw permanently clenched in chronic resentment, and hands that remained in fists even when relaxed, watched the entire scene with narrow eyes of distrust and jealousy. Valeria felt the weight of that gaze like a hunting knife between her shoulder blades, as if it could pierce her skin with the sheer intensity of his hatred. She knew that kind of rage. Mateo had always been Gale's shadow, always the second son who would never be good enough, always desperately competing for crumbs of approval from a dead patriarch who despised him in life, and an older brother who saw him as a disposable tool, not as an equal or partner. Mateo was dangerous precisely because he had nothing to lose and everything to prove. He would kill for recognition, torture for respect, destroy entire worlds just to hear Gale say a word of genuine praise. Valeria gave a slight, practiced, perfectly subservient bow and stepped away from the scene, her heart pounding against her ribs so loudly she was sure everyone in the room could hear it. The plan was working better than she had dared to hope during the sleepless nights of meticulous planning. Gael wanted her close. It meant access to the inner corridors of power. It meant the opportunity to find evidence that had remained hidden for over a decade. It meant calculated risk that could end with her violent death at any moment. When the party reached its peak a few hours later, the electronic music pulsing too loudly through speakers that cost a fortune, the guests drunk enough to forget discretion, the security distracted by the sheer number of people, and the chaotic exuberance of the celebration, Valeria slipped discreetly into the mansion's inner corridors, abandoning her tray on a service table. Her feet knew that path even after 12 long years of forced absence. Her body remembered, with the precision of an indelible muscle memory, the texture of the cold Italian marble beneath her soles, the characteristic scent of polished mahogany and dried roses that always permeated the mansion, the exact way the silvery moonlight streamed through the tall imported stained glass windows and painted elongated, distorted shadows on the walls covered with European wallpaper. This mansion had been her home for the first 15 years of her life, when her father, José Morales, worked as the Salazar's chief accountant, the man who kept the books organized and knew every financial secret of the family, before it became his psychological prison, before it became his father's metaphorical tomb. She climbed the back stairs the employees used so as not to disturb the bosses, carefully avoiding the main halls where security guards still patrolled with earpieces and weapons hidden under expensive coats, and followed the muscle memory buried deep in her motor cortex to the second floor of the West Wing. Her old room was at the end of the hall, a dark oak door with bronze trim that no one had legitimate reason to open after so long. Valeria turned the doorknob slowly, expecting resistance. But to her surprise, the door was unlocked, as if someone knew she was coming, as if they had been waiting for her inevitable return all these years. The thought filled her with icy dread. The room was empty, but not abandoned to dust and decay as she had expected. Someone kept it meticulously clean without a single cobweb or mildew stain. The bed still had the same light blue comforter with white cloud patterns that she had chosen at age 10. The curtains were still white linen that allowed the soft morning light to filter in. And on the cherry wood desk, under a very thin layer of recent dust, was an antique necklace that she recognized immediately with a start that almost made her scream. Her hands trembled violently as she picked it up, her fingers barely able to hold the object. The initials VM were engraved on the oval pendant in an elaborate, old-fashioned calligraphy that belonged to another era. Her father, Jose, had commissioned this necklace especially for her on her 10th birthday, using his 3 months' savings, having not only the initials engraved but also a small message on the back, "For my Valeria, my greatest treasure." She was wearing it the day he died, the day her life was shattered and burned. Why was he still here, carefully preserved in this room, maintained like a sanctuary or a mausoleum? Why had Gale kept him for 12 whole years, when it would have been so much simpler to destroy all evidence of his previous existence? The answer terrified her more deeply than any direct threat. Gale remembered her perfectly. Perhaps he had never forgotten her, not even for a single day. Perhaps he had meticulously searched for her all these years, his vast resources scouring orphanages, streets, government records, always searching for her like a predator that never gives up on a specific prey. Valeria tucked the necklace into the deep pocket of her uniform and left the room quickly, moving now with urgency, driven by pure adrenaline and the growing fear of imminent discovery. She needed to find the library quickly before her absence was noticed. It was there that her father kept the most important and sensitive documents, the explosive financial secrets, and the detailed evidence he had tried to use to destroy the Salazars and expose their criminal operations before they destroyed him first, permanently and brutally. On her way through the inner gardens illuminated by soft, strategically placed lights, she passed the stone shed at the back of the property, an old building that used to house agricultural equipment and tools back when the mansion still pretended to be a legitimate coffee and cattle farm. The heavy wooden door was ajar a few inches, swaying slightly in the night breeze. Valeria pushed it open slowly and carefully, the sharp, prolonged creak of the rusty hinges echoing in the oppressive silence of the night like a warning cry. Inside the dusty shed, lit only by a single dim, incandescent bulb hanging from the ceiling by an exposed and precarious wire, stood a large portrait framed in expensive wood, carefully propped against the stone wall. Valeria approached slowly, her breath held tightly in her lungs, her heart pausing for a beat before racing wildly. It was her. At 14, before the world crumbled, smiling genuinely at the camera with that innocence impossible to recover, wearing a bright yellow dress that her mother Lucia, who had died of cancer 3 years before Jose's death, had hand-sewn during nights of hard work. And beside the portrait, written directly on the frame in handwriting she would instantly recognize anywhere in the world or after any amount of time, was a dedication from her father. For Valeria, may she always come home. This will always be her home, no matter what happens. I love you infinitely, Dad. Hot tears burned intensely in her eyes, blurring her vision and threatening to overflow, but she violently forced them back through sheer willpower. There was no time for mourning now, no room for feelings when she was in the middle of enemy territory. She had the rest of her life to cry. At this moment, she had work to do. She carefully removed the photograph from its frame and folded it, tucking it inside her coat along with the necklace, transforming these artifacts into physical talismans of her mission. Valeria continued toward the main mansion, cutting through meticulously manicured gardens where imported exotic flowers grew in perfectly geometric flower beds. The library was on the ground floor of the east wing, behind an imposing double door of solid oak with elaborate carvings depicting scenes from historical battles. Valeria needed a specific electronic access card to enter, a crucial detail she had discovered weeks earlier during her obsessively meticulous research into the property's updated security, studying old blueprints, bribing former employees for information, hacking external security systems. She was about to try to force the electronic lock using a device she had bought on the black market when she heard heavy male footsteps rapidly approaching behind her in the marble hallway. "Are you lost?" The voice was masculine, low and controlled, with an accent that mixed standard Mexican Spanish and something softer that she couldn't immediately identify. Valeria turned sharply, her hand automatically going to the small knife hidden in her belt, and found herself face to face with Santiago Ortega. Santiago was the Salazar's main driver, a 46-year-old man with prematurely gray hair, broad shoulders from heavy physical labor, calloused hands marked with small scars, and a perpetually weary expression stemming from carrying secrets too heavy for one person to bear alone. He wore the standard driver's uniform, a discreet black suit, a black tie, and black shoes polished to a gleam. Valeria had seen him a few times during the party, always in the shadows of the halls, always observing everything and everyone with those dark, attentive eyes, always on the perimeter. There was something about him that made her deeply uncomfortable, a disconcerting familiarity she couldn't name or explain, as if her subconscious recognized something her conscious mind couldn't process. "I'm looking for the bathroom," Valeria lied with practiced conviction, keeping her voice steady and her face composed. "I got lost in this enormous mansion. All the hallways look the same." Santiago studied her for a long, uncomfortably long moment, his dark, unreadable eyes scanning her face with almost scientific attention, as if memorizing or comparing it to some mental image. Then, to her complete surprise and alarm, he took a deliberate step to the side, unlocking her escape route, and said in a low voice, "The bathroom is in the next hallway, third door on the left. But you're not really looking for the bathroom, are you? Not with that look in your eyes. Not with those tense hands ready to fight." He paused meaningfully, his eyes meeting hers directly. "This house eats people, you know. People go in beautiful, full of hope or ambition, and come out completely broken inside. Or they don't come out at all. Their bodies are found weeks later in distant places. I've seen it happen dozens of times." Valeria felt a cold chill run down her spine. "Why are you telling me this? What do you want in return?" Santiago shrugged heavily, as if carrying the weight of the world. "Because you remind me of someone I used to know very well. Someone young and idealistic who deserved much better than he ended up with, who deserved to live a long and happy life instead of dying violently trying to do the right thing." He took a magnetic access card from the inside pocket of his jacket and handed it to her with a firm hand. "Drop it discreetly near the door when you're finished what you came here to do. I'll tell the security guards I lost mine during the party chaos." Before Valeria could respond, ask urgent questions, or even fully process what had just happened, Santiago turned smoothly and disappeared down the dark hallway, his steps silent as a ghost's, leaving her completely alone with the heavy card in her hand and a million unanswered questions echoing chaotically in her head. Who was he really? Why was he helping her? Who was the person she reminded him of? Was it an elaborate trap? She used the card to open the library with a smooth electronic click and entered quickly, closing the heavy door behind her and locking it from the inside with the additional manual bolt. The room was absolutely enormous, easily the size of an entire apartment, with floor-to-ceiling dark mahogany bookshelves covering 3 entire walls, a massive mahogany executive desk in the center of the space under a smaller crystal chandelier, Italian leather reading armchairs in the corners, and a professional safe discreetly embedded in the back wall behind a 3-by-2-meter oil portrait of the deceased patriarch of the Salazar family. The air smelled of old paper, leather, and expensive cigars. Valeria went straight to the desk and began systematically rummaging through the drawers, working from left to right. Most of the documents were seemingly legitimate business import and export contracts, detailed financial records of shell companies with generic names, and mundane correspondence about board meetings and investment strategies. But in the last drawer in the lower right corner, carefully hidden under a thick pile of papers yellowed with age that looked like old tax reports from the 1990s, she found a worn and stained leather folder. Inside was a photograph of herself at age 15, the exact same age she was when her father Jose died violently, and a handwritten note in dark red ink that looked like dried blood. Valeria Morales, daughter of Jose, orphaned since 03/15/2013. Last known location, Santa Maria Orphanage, Mexico City. She knows too much about the operations. Potential future threat. Monitor, but do not eliminate yet. May be useful as future leverage. GM. Valeria's blood literally froze in her veins, her body temperature seeming to drop 10 degrees instantly. They knew. All this time, for those 12 whole years, they knew exactly where she was and that she could eventually become a significant threat. Why hadn't they killed her too, like they had killed her father? The obvious answer was disturbing. They kept her alive because they might need her, because she had potential value as a hostage or bargaining chip, because Gail Salazar never wasted resources that could be exploited in the future. She hadn't escaped. They had deliberately let her go, knowing they could retrieve her at any time. Valeria was visibly trembling now, adrenaline and fear competing in her nervous system. She tucked the briefcase into her coat along with the other items, dropped the access card seemingly by accident near the door as Santiago had specifically instructed, and climbed out the back window overlooking the garden, briefly hanging onto the ledge before falling into a bed of soft flowers, disappearing into the protective darkness of the night before anyone could see her or sound any alarm. 3 agonizing days later, Valeria returned. Not as Vera, the invisible, subservient waitress no one noticed or cared about, but as herself, or at least the hardened, dangerous version of herself who had miraculously survived 12 brutal years in an overcrowded orphanage where children regularly disappeared, the unforgiving streets of Mexico City where every night was a fight for survival, and obsessive self-taught training in computer hacking, hand-to-hand combat through online videos and cheap gym practice, and weapons handling through questionable underworld contacts. She desperately needed more concrete information. She needed to fully understand what that folder meant for her safety and her plans. And she needed to confront Santiago directly about why he had helped her when it would have been far safer for him to simply report her to his Salazar bosses. She found him in the mansion's private parking lot, methodically polishing the black Mercedes S-Class that Gail used for important business meetings and discreet political gathering. Santiago didn't seem at all surprised to see her approaching through the side entrance. "I thought you'd be smarter than that," he said without lifting his eyes from the bumper he was polishing with precise circular motions. "Coming back here so early is pure suicide. They increased security after they discovered someone broke into the library. New cameras everywhere, more guards. Gail is paranoid." "You helped me," Valeria said bluntly, crossing her arms defensively over her chest. "I want to know why. Nobody helps anyone for free, especially not in this world." Santiago finally stopped polishing and looked directly at her, and there was something deep and disturbing in his expression, genuine guilt, perhaps, or corrosive remorse of the kind that eats a person away from the inside over years, that made her involuntarily take a half-step back. "Because I know exactly who you are, Valeria Morales. I recognized you the second I saw you at the wedding, even with the 12-year age difference and physical changes. You have the same eyes as your father. And I know perfectly well what they did to Jose Morales. I know because I was there that terrible night. The whole world seemed to tilt dangerously on its axis, reality distorting itself. I was the designated driver on the night of March 15, 2013, the night Jose Morales died," Santiago interrupted quickly, his voice low, urgent and heavy with suppressed emotion. I took his father to the abandoned warehouse near the port where Gael and Mateo were waiting with 3 other men. They told me it was just a routine business meeting, that they were only going to talk to Jose about some minor financial discrepancies, try to reach an amicable agreement to correct some numbers. I had no idea they were going to execute him. You have to believe me about that. He ran a trembling hand across his face, suddenly looking 10 years older. When I heard the gunshot echoing through the warehouse, it was too late. I ran inside and Jose was already on the floor, blood spreading across his body. Gael calmly wiped the gun with a rag as if he had just cleaned a tool. He looked at me and said in that cold voice of his, "If you tell anyone, police, journalists, family, anyone, about what you saw here tonight, your wife and your 2 daughters will be next. I'll make you watch before I kill you too." Then Mateo and the others carried Jose's body back to the car. They staged the suicide, hanged their father in his own house as if he had done it alone, left a forged note about gambling debts and shame. And I drove them back and didn't say a single word. I let it happen. I was complicit through my cowardly silence. Valeria felt sour bile rise violently in her throat, a toxic mixture of incandescent rage, profound disgust, renewed pain, and betrayal. "So you're an accomplice. You helped kill my father through your inaction. You're just as guilty as they are." "I know," Santiago said, his voice visibly breaking for the first time. "God knows I know, and I absolutely regret it every single day since then. Not a single day goes by that I don't see Jose's face when I entered that warehouse. His 2 daughters are about the same age you were. That's why I'm helping you now, risking my life and the lives of my family. It's very little, very late, but it's all I can do." "But Valeria, you need to understand one absolutely crucial thing. Revenge against the Salazars isn't simply revenge against 2 dangerous men. It's declaring war against a criminal empire that has deep roots throughout Mexico and beyond. They work for people far more powerful than you can imagine in your worst nightmares. Politicians at the highest level, federal judges, military generals, international cartels who move billions. People who don't forgive threats and who have unlimited resources. If you try to destroy them, they will mobilize all that power to destroy you first, and it will be slow and painful. I don't care about the consequences," Valeria said through clenched teeth, each word coming out like a death sentence. "They took everything from me. My family, my home, my childhood, my future. I'll take everything from them too, even if it kills me in the process." Santiago sighed heavily, an exhalation that carried the weight of years. "So at least be strategically intelligent about this. Don't be suicidal. There are things you need to see before making any move. Physical and digital files, old VHS and audio recordings, detailed evidence of what they internally call Project Orchid." "Project Orchid," Valeria repeated, her mind already beginning to catalog the name. Santiago looked around cautiously to make sure they were completely alone before continuing in an even lower voice. "Human trafficking on an industrial scale. It started small about 20 years ago as a smuggling operation of illegal workers into the United States. But it grew. It metastasized like cancer. Now it's a massive system disguised as perfectly legitimate freight routes. They move hundreds of people a month across borders, women forced into prostitution, children sold for illegal adoption or worse, men enslaved on clandestine farms and factories. The name Orchid comes from the code system they use. Each flower is a person, each bouquet is a group, each arrangement is a specific destination. Your father, Jose, discovered the true nature of the business when he was auditing the financial books. That's why he had to die. He threatened to expose everything publicly if they didn't stop, said he would take everything to federal authorities and the international press. And you're the only person besides me who knows that Project Orchid actually exists now that Jose is dead. Valeria processed all of this, her brain working quickly through the implications. Where are these files and evidence? Most of it is in the library, in the main safe you saw. But you'll need the 6-digit numerical combination, and officially only Gail and Mateo know it by heart. It's never been written down anywhere for obvious security reasons. Santiago paused meaningfully. Unless you can create a substantial enough distraction to give me time to open the safe using techniques I learned in another life. I can do that, but I'll need at least 12 uninterrupted minutes. When can we do this? Valeria asked, her mind already forming plans. Tonight. There's an important business meeting at the downtown hotel with potential Colombian partners. Gael, Mateo, and most of the heavy security will be there for at least 3 hours. The mansion will be relatively empty, except for standard security guards stationed at the entrances. I can temporarily disable the CCTV cameras for exactly 12 minutes using a recorded video loop before the system detects the interference and triggers automatic alarms. No more than 12 minutes, or we'll all die. That's enough for me, Valeria said with a confidence she didn't fully feel, and turned to leave. Valeria? Santiago called softly after she had taken 3 steps. She stopped, but didn't turn. I'm very deeply sorry for what happened to Jose. For what it's worth now, I'm truly sorry. He was a good man in a bad place. Valeria didn't respond verbally because she didn't trust her voice at that moment. I'm sorry wouldn't bring her father back from the dead. It wouldn't undo 12 years of trauma. It wouldn't heal wounds that would never truly close. But perhaps, just perhaps, it could begin some kind of redemption for both of them. That night, under a starless sky covered by heavy clouds that threatened imminent rain, Valeria infiltrated the mansion for the 3rd time, using all the knowledge she had meticulously accumulated during her previous visits and careful observations. Santiago had been absolutely true to his word. The security cameras were displaying recorded video loops showing empty hallways, and the library was completely deserted, locked from the outside. She worked quickly and efficiently with absolute focus, using professional lock-picking tools she had bought on the black market through criminal contacts to pick the library locks, while Santiago worked on the built-in safe using a medical stethoscope to listen to the internal mechanisms. Inside the reinforced steel safe, documents were meticulously organized in color-coded folders, detailed transport contracts with shell companies, sea and land routes marked on laminated maps, extensive lists of names with barcodes, specific destinations with GPS coordinates, financial records showing transactions worth millions of dollars, photographs of merchandise that were clearly people held in containers and warehouses. Project Orchid was far vaster and more deeply branched than Valeria had imagined in her worst-case scenarios, rooted not only in Mexico but throughout Latin America, Central America, and extending as far as the United States and Europe. Valeria photographed absolutely everything with her encrypted cell phone, her hands trembling violently with growing anger and adrenaline that made her heart beat so fast it seemed impossible. There were layers upon layers of meticulously documented corruption, politicians receiving monthly payments, judges selectively dismissing cases, federal police providing escorts, immigration officials falsifying documents. It was a complete system, a well-oiled human trafficking machine operating openly under the guise of corporate legitimacy. The flowers, as the victims were called in the clinically inhumane documents, were categorized by age, gender, physical appearance, and final destination. Children were valued most. Young women were primarily directed towards the sex industry. Men went to slave labor on remote farms or illegal mining operations. It was industrialized, systematized, utterly horrific in its brutal efficiency. But what brought Valeria to a complete standstill, the air freezing in her lungs, was an old VHS tape carefully labeled with a date written in red permanent marker, March 15th, 2013, the exact day her father died. The date was burned into her memory like a scar. She grabbed the tape with trembling hands and was about to leave when she heard loud voices echoing through the outside corridors. Shouts, orders being yelled. Santiago suddenly appeared in the library doorway, his eyes wide with genuine panic, sweat dripping down his face. They came back much earlier than planned. The meeting was an ambush by a rival faction. We need to leave now immediately. Valeria and Santiago ran desperately through the labyrinthine corridors. But the armed guards were already on high alert, dozens of them converging from all directions. In the entrance courtyard, illuminated by intense spotlights, quickly surrounded by at least 12 men armed with pistols and rifles, Santiago did something Valeria absolutely did not expect. He shouted loudly enough to echo throughout the property. "Valeria! Valeria Morales! Run now!" The name echoed through the open space like a gunshot, reverberating off the walls and windows. Gail Salazar, who was getting out of a black armored limousine with tinted windows, froze completely mid-movement. His eyes met hers across a distance of perhaps 20 meters, and Valeria saw recognition finally settle fully on her face. Total understanding flooded her features. He knew exactly who she was. In fact, he had always known all these years, just waiting to see what she would do, like a spider patiently watching a fly approach its web. Santiago violently pushed Valeria toward an old Toyota Corolla that was strategically positioned with its engine already running, the back seat and trunk completely full of physical documents and flash drives that he had carefully prepared, anticipating exactly this situation. "Go! Go now! I'll hold them here!" "Santiago, no!" Valeria began to protest. "Go!" Santiago shouted with an intensity that left no room for argument, and then bravely turned to face the rapidly approaching security guards with their weapons drawn. Valeria got into the car with a breaking heart, accelerated violently, making the tires screech loudly, tears finally blurring her peripheral vision completely, the sound of gunshots echoing behind her like fireworks from hell. She didn't look back in the rearview mirror because she couldn't bear to see. She couldn't process whether Santiago was alive or dead because of her. In the extremely cheap hotel where she was temporarily hiding, a tiny room in a dangerous neighborhood where nobody asked questions and there were no security cameras, Valeria finally managed to find an old working VHS player she had bought at a dusty thrift store. The image was grainy and shaky, but terrifyingly clear enough to shatter what remained of her soul. Her father, Jose Morales, was brutally tied to a metal chair, his face severely bruised and swollen, with at least one eye closed, the eyes that still opened filled with unbearable physical pain, but also with unwavering defiance. Gail Salazar stood in front of her, less than a meter away, grinning that truly cruel and cold smile that didn't reach his dead eyes. Mateo Salazar was in the background, partially out of focus, casually holding a Glock 19 pistol. "You really should have kept quiet, Jose," Gail said coldly in the shaky recording. "Project Orchid is much bigger than you, bigger than any of us individually. You threatened the wrong people, people who neither forgive nor forget." "And my daughter Valeria?" Jose asked in a weak but still determined voice, bleeding from the mouth. "What are you going to do with my girl?" Gail tilted his head thoughtfully as if considering the fate of an object, not a child. "Would it be worth it? She's young, still malleable. We can mold her for our purposes in the future if necessary, or eliminate her if she poses a real threat. But for now, let's let her live carrying the psychological weight of what happened to you. The guilt, the doubt, the trauma. It will be a much more effective and lasting lesson than a quick bullet." Then Mateo shot. Jose fell. The screen went black. Valeria vomited violently onto the hotel floor, her body shaking with sobs that came from a place deeper than her lungs. But amidst the devastating pain, something else crystallized within her, an absolutely lethal fury, cold as ice and sharp as a blade. It was no longer about emotional revenge, it was about systemic justice. It was about destroying every pillar that supported the Salazar empire until nothing remained but ashes and bad memories. Over the following weeks, Valeria worked methodically. Through contacts in the digital underworld that she had carefully cultivated over the years, she found Elias Navarro, a brilliant 28-year-old hacker with his own visceral reasons for hating the Salazars. Elias's younger sister, only 16 years old, had disappeared 3 years earlier, taken along one of Project Orchid's routes and never seen again. He had spent all those 1,000 days seeking revenge. When Valeria showed him the documents she had stolen, the photographs, the detailed routes, the names of those involved, Elias cried for the first time since his sister's disappearance. Then he began to work. Santiago, who had miraculously survived the confrontation in the courtyard with only superficial injuries, a bullet grazing his left shoulder, several bruised ribs, reappeared a week later at the safe apartment Valeria was using. He brought more documents, flash drives containing internal surveillance videos, and audio recordings of conversations secretly recorded over the years. "I've been gathering evidence for 15 years, he confessed, sitting at the makeshift table surrounded by scattered papers. "Waiting for the right moment. You are that moment, Valeria. You are the storm they deserve." The plan they developed together was simultaneously simple and audacious to the point of madness. Gail was planning a new marriage, this time with Isabella Marquez, daughter of federal judge Rodrigo Marquez, one of the most powerful men in the Mexican judicial system. It was a purely political marriage, a calculated fusion of organized crime and legal authority that would make the Salazars virtually untouchable. The ceremony would be held at the Grand Civil Registry Office in the center of Mexico City, broadcast live on national television as a high society event. 300 guests. Heavy security. The entire corrupt elite of Mexico gathered in one place. It was the perfect target. Elias spent entire nights without sleep, preparing the most elaborate hack of his career. He would need to simultaneously hack into all major television networks, live streaming platforms, and government transmission systems. He would need to create an indelible digital archive, automatically distributed across thousands of servers around the world at the moment of transmission. The motherbook of Project Orchid, every document, every photograph, every recording, every name, every route, exposed to tens of millions of viewers simultaneously. "They'll try to kill us the second they realize what's happening," Elias warned, his fingers flying across 3 different keyboards, code cascading across the screens like digital waterfalls. "We need an escape route. Multiple routes, actually." "I'm not going to run away," Valeria said calmly, checking the Glock 19 pistol she had bought illegally. "Not until Gail looks me in the eyes and knows exactly who I am and what he created." Santiago studied her for a long moment, recognizing in her the same suicidal determination he had seen in Jose Morales 12 years earlier. "Then at least wear a bulletproof vest, and let me cover your exit. It's the least I can do." The wedding day arrived under clear skies and relentless sunshine. Valeria entered the Grand Civil Registry not as an invisible employee, but through the main entrance, wearing an elegant black suit she had bought specifically for this occasion, her hair neatly styled, and minimal makeup. She was no longer hiding. She carried a small bag containing the pistol, an encrypted tablet connected to Elias's systems, and the necklace with the initials VM, now transformed into a symbol of her recovered identity. Security at the entrance was tight. Metal detectors, body scanners, armed guards checking every guest. But Santiago had worked his magic behind the scenes, adding the name Vera Salinas to the official guest list, marking her as the press officer. Valeria passed through security without incident, her heart pounding so fast it seemed impossible that no one could hear it. The main hall was obscenely magnificent. Italian marble, white flowers covering every surface, crystal chandeliers, gilded chairs arranged in perfect rows. Television cameras were strategically positioned, capturing every angle. Guests arrived in waves, clad in expensive perfume and designer clothes. Senators, judges, businessmen, celebrities, all complicit in the rotten system that sustained the Salazar empire. Gail Salazar entered through the side door at 3:47 p.m., exactly on schedule. He wore an impeccable tuxedo that probably cost more than Valeria had earned in her entire life. His face was relaxed, confident, his charming smile perfectly calibrated for the cameras. He was the image of respectability, of business success, of the man who had overcome the unfounded accusations of the past. Mateo was 3 steps behind him, his eyes constantly scanning the surroundings for threats, his right hand always near the gun hidden under his jacket. The ceremony began at 4:00 p.m. The judge, bought and controlled by the Salazar family, began the traditional vows. The bride, Isabella, smiled nervously, clearly not fully understanding what kind of family she was entering. The cameras recorded everything, broadcasting live to the entire nation. At 4:07 p.m., Elijah carried out the command. All the television screens in the registry office, strategically positioned so guests could watch the ceremony from different angles, simultaneously flickered and changed. The image of the ceremony disappeared. In its place appeared a digitized document, then another, and another. Photographs of people chained in containers, videos of transactions where human beings were sold as merchandise, financial spreadsheets detailing payments to politicians whose names were now being broadcast nationally, maps showing human trafficking routes through 7 countries, audio recordings of Gael ordering executions, the video of Jose Morales' death. The entire room froze in collective shock. Then it exploded into absolute chaos. Valeria calmly rose from her seat in the last row and began walking down the central aisle while 300 people screamed, ran, and desperately tried to escape. Security guards yelled into radios. Politicians tried to hide their faces. Television cameras continued broadcasting, now capturing both the exposed documents and the hysterical reaction of Mexico's corrupt elite. Gael saw Valeria approaching. His eyes widened in complete recognition, and for the first time in her life, Valeria saw genuine fear on his face. "You," he said, his voice hoarse. "Valeria Morales." "Valeria Salazar," she corrected, stopping 3 meters away, completely calm amidst the chaos. Her voice was amplified by the open cameras, broadcast to millions. "Daughter of Jose Morales, the chief accountant you executed on March 15, 2013, because he discovered the truth about Project Orchid. Legitimate heir of this corrupt family. And I am here to sign the end of your empire of blood and suffering." Mateo reacted first, drawing his weapon. Santiago appeared out of nowhere, striking Mateo before he could shoot. The two fell into a violent fight, brutal blows, blood splattering on the white marble. Salazar's security guards converged from all directions, weapons raised. But other security guards, those loyal to the federal judge, who suddenly realized he had been completely deceived and used, blocked the path, creating a Mexican standoff of guns pointed in multiple directions. "You don't understand," Gael said, trying to regain control, that cruel smile slowly returning. "Do you think it matters? Do you think anyone really cares? Everyone in this room knows exactly what we do. And nobody will do absolutely anything because everyone is implicated, everyone gets their share, everyone has blood on their hands. But now the whole world knows too," Valeria replied, pointing to the television cameras that were still broadcasting every word live. "You're right. Those documents alone might not have been enough. The system is deeply corrupt. But mass public exposure, millions of people watching in real time, impossible to deny or cover up, that changes everything. Your empire is burning right now, Gael, and you're going to feel every flame." It was then that Mateo, bleeding from a deep cut above his left eye, but still fighting fiercely with Santiago, managed to break free for a moment. He grabbed a fallen gun and fired, not at Valeria, but randomly into the chaos. The shot struck one of the massive crystal chandeliers. 1,000 fragments of glass and metal shattered, triggering even greater panic. "Get out! Everyone get out now!" Santiago yelled, pushing Valeria toward the emergency exit he had strategically unlocked hours earlier. But Valeria had one last task. "The cemetery!" she shouted to Santiago over the deafening commotion. "We need to finish this at the Sanctuary of the Angel." They fled as the registry office descended into complete chaos. Police sirens blaring, news helicopters circling overhead, millions watching on television as the most important wedding of the year turned into the most devastating political scandal in modern Mexican history. The Sanctuary of the Angel was the Salazar family's private cemetery, located on a secluded estate 40 kilometers outside the city. It was where all the patriarchs were buried under elaborate mausoleums of marble and bronze, where the family's power was symbolically rooted. Valeria, Santiago, and Elias arrived first, having meticulously planned every detail of this final phase. In the preceding days, following information extracted from Mateo during a brutal interrogation conducted by Santiago, which revealed a much darker side of the former driver, they had discovered something shocking. Jose Morales' body had never been officially buried. Instead, it was hidden behind the cemetery's main altar in an unmarked crypt, physical evidence that the Salazars kept as a safekeeping or perverse trophy. Valeria found her father's body exactly where Mateo had said it would be. The bones had been partially preserved by the dry environment of the sealed crypt. She knelt beside him, holding his cold, bony hand, and wept for the first time in years. Not tears of despair, but of final resolution. There was a note in the inside pocket of José's rotting coat, protected in a plastic envelope. The handwriting was different, not José's, but that of someone who witnessed his death. Valeria opened it with trembling hands. The truth about José Morales. He wasn't just a victim. He was a hero. He knew they were going to kill him, but he chose to confront them anyway to protect you, Valeria, and to document final evidence before he died. He hid a second complete set of Project Orchid files that even the Salazars don't know exist. Coordinates: 19-432-608, 99-1-33209. Use them to finish what he started. A friend who failed to save him. Valeria didn't have time to fully process it. Cars were rapidly approaching. The Salazars and their private cartel had tracked her location. "Elias, now!" Santiago yelled. Elias activated the explosives he had carefully planted around the bases of all the main mausoleums of the Salazar patriarchs. "The roots of the system," he said calmly, "need to be burned completely, until nothing remains but ashes and poisoned memory." The explosion lit up the night sky like a second rising sun. Centuries-old marble shattered, bronze melted. The tombs of the men who had built the Salazar Empire upon decades of human suffering were reduced to smoking craters. It was symbolic destruction, yes, but also absolutely necessary. A visual endpoint that would be broadcast across the world's news networks. They escaped through secret trails that Santiago knew, disappearing into the darkness as the cartel arrived too late, finding only burning ruins and the recovered body of José Morales, physical evidence that could no longer be hidden or denied. 6 full months later, Mexico was a different country. The Project Orchid scandal had brought down 17 high-level politicians, forced the resignation of 6 federal judges, and dismantled 3 of the largest human trafficking networks in Latin America. International investigations were underway. Hundreds of victims had been rescued. The flowers were finally free, but Gael Salazar, in some impossible and frustrating way, had done what he always did: survive and reinvent himself. With expensive lawyers and deep connections that even public exposure couldn't completely break, he emerged not as a villain, but as a supposed reformer. Headlines screamed, "Gael Salazar, survivor of terrorist attack, leads new anti-corruption force." He claimed to have been a victim of criminal subordinates, that he was unaware of the true operations, and that he would dedicate his life to repairing the damage. It was obscene, but it was also the system showing its true nature. Some men were too powerful to fall completely. From a small apartment in Buenos Aires, Argentina, Valeria watched the news with a mixture of bitter satisfaction and lingering anger. She was officially dead, supposedly killed in the cemetery fire according to official Mexican records. It was safer that way. Santiago lived somewhere in Canada under a completely new identity, trying to finally find peace. Elias had disappeared completely into the digital underworld, now working to dismantle other trafficking networks around the world. Valeria wrote in a worn notebook, documenting everything for a book she might never publish. The videos and files are too scattered to be completely erased. The truth is out there now, growing like a resilient weed in scorched soil. I am no longer the delicate flower they tried to uproot. I am the earth after the purifying fire. I am what survives when everything else has been consumed. I am the memory that cannot be erased. Then her encrypted cell phone vibrated. Completely unknown number. Just 7 words that instantly made her blood run cold. "Mateo is not dead. He's coming after you." Valeria slowly closed her notebook and walked to the panoramic window where Buenos Aires shimmered under the nightlights. She touched the necklace with the initials VM. The folded photograph of her father that she always carried in her pocket, and allowed a cold, calculated smile to form on her lips. Mateo had survived the fire she thought had completely consumed him. He was out there somewhere in the world, hunting her with the same obsessive determination she had used to hunt the Salazar. The cycle of violence and revenge hadn't ended. Perhaps it never truly would. But Valeria didn't feel fear. She felt almost anticipation. She had fundamentally changed during this journey. She was no longer the traumatized orphan girl. She was something far more dangerous, someone who had looked directly into the heart of human darkness and decided not only to survive, but to dominate. Let Mateo come. Let everyone come. She would be waiting, because revenge wasn't a single act with a clean beginning, middle, and end. It was an eternal cycle, a wheel that turned through generations, fueled by blood and memory. And Valeria Morales, or Valeria Salazar, or whoever she needed to be to survive, had no intention of breaking that cycle. She intended to dominate him completely, to become his own definition of justice, to transform herself into the storm that men like the Salazars deserved, but never expected. The war continued. It would always continue. But this time, she would not be the victim. She would be the huntress.